Jamie Fraser was dying, not slowly, not peacefully. He was slipping away right in front of the one person who had crossed time itself just to be with him. Claire stood there, hands shaking, heart pounding, looking at the man she had given up everything for. And in that moment, she had one thought, not fear, not grief, just pure, burning determination. She was not going to let him go. Not today. Not like this. But what no one knew yet was that saving Jamie was going to cost Claire something she never expected to lose. Something that would change both of them forever. This is the moment Outlander fans have been waiting for all season. This is the episode where love is not just a feeling. It is a decision. A painful, desperate, beautiful decision. Asterisk to understand how powerful this moment is. You have to know what brought Jamie and Claire to this point. Season 8 has been one of the most emotional and intense seasons in the entire Outlander story. Jamie and Claire have been through war, separation, loss, and heartbreak more times than most people could survive. But this season pushed them harder than ever before. Earlier in the season, Jamie had been caught in the middle of a brutal conflict. He was fighting to protect his family, his land, and the people he loved. But war does not care about good intentions. In a confrontation that fans are still talking about, Jamie took a serious injury. At first, it seemed manageable. He had survived worse. Everyone around him tried to stay calm and believe that he would pull through the way he always did, but this time was different. The wound did not heal the way it should have. Days passed and instead of getting better, Jamie got worse. His body was fighting something deeper than just a physical cut. An infection had set in, quiet and cruel, moving through him like a shadow. By the time it became clear how serious things were, Jamie was already burning with fever. He could barely speak. He could barely open his eyes. The man who had stood tall through some of the most brutal moments in Scottish history was now lying completely still, and the color had drained from his face. Claire knew the signs. She had seen infections like this before, back in her time as a surgeon in the 20th century. She understood exactly what was happening inside his body, and that understanding made everything even more terrifying. Because she also knew that without the right medicine, without the tools she used to have access to, the chances of pulling someone back from this kind of infection were not good. She was a brilliant doctor trapped in a time where her full abilities were always being limited by what was available around her. And yet Claire Fraser had never once let those limitations stop her. She had always found a way. She had made medicines from plants and roots and things she gathered from the land. She had performed procedures that even trained doctors of this era would not have attempted. She had fought for the lives of strangers with the same intensity she brought to the people she loved most. So when Jamie's condition turned critical, Claire did not fall apart. She got to work. Asterisk, there is a specific kind of fear that only comes when you are watching someone you love fade right in front of you and you cannot stop it no matter how hard you try. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It just sits in your chest like a stone and gets heavier with every passing second. That is exactly where Claire was standing now, not as a wife. Not as a woman who was scared, but as a doctor who knew too much, who understood every single thing that was going wrong inside Jamie's body, and who felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on her like something she could not breathe through. Jamie's breathing had changed. Anyone else in the room might not have noticed it right away, but Claire noticed. She had spent years learning how to read the human body the way other people read words on a page. The rhythm of his chest was no longer steady. It was shallow and uneven, like a candle flame flickering in a room where the wind keeps finding its way through the cracks. His skin was hot to the touch but looked pale, almost gray in the low light of the room. His lips were dry. His hands, those big strong hands that had held her through every storm their life together had thrown at them, were completely still at his sides. She pressed her fingers to his wrist and counted. His pulse was too fast and too weak at the same time. That combination told her everything she did not want to know. The infection had moved further than she had hoped. It was no longer sitting in one place. It was spreading through his blood. And if she did not stop it soon, his body would start shutting down piece by piece. She had seen it happen before. She knew exactly how it ended when no one was able to stop it in time. She turned away from him for just a moment, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to think clearly, and looking at him made that almost impossible. She walked to the small wooden table where she had laid out everything she had been collecting and preparing over the last several hours. Strips of clean cloth, a clay bowl with a dark paste she had made from roots she recognized from a plant that grew near the river, a small pot of water that was still warm, dried herbs tied in bundles that hung from a hook on the wall. These were her tools, not the ones she wished she had, but the ones she had. And she was going to make them work. The people around her were watching her the way people always watched Claire in moments like this, with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They believed in her, but they were also afraid. And that fear lived just underneath the surface of every quiet look they exchanged with each other when they thought she was not paying attention. She was always paying attention. She noticed everything. But right now she did not have the space to comfort anyone. Every single part of her focus had to go toward Jamie. She began by cleaning the wound again, carefully and completely removing anything that did not belong there and examining the surrounding skin with the kind of sharp, steady attention that only comes from years of training. What she saw confirmed what she already feared. The edges of the wound were angry and swollen. There was a heat radiating from it that had no business being there at this stage. She had treated this area before, but clearly something had been missed or something new had taken hold since the last time she had checked. She reached for the paste she had made and began applying it in slow, deliberate layers directly to the wound. The paste was made from a combination of plants she knew had natural properties that could fight the kind of infection now threatening Jamie's life. She had used variations of this treatment before with results that had surprised even her, but she had never used it on someone this far gone. She had never needed to push it this hard. As she worked, the room was almost completely silent except for the occasional sound of the fire and the unsteady rhythm of Jamie's breathing. Every few seconds she would glance up at his face, checking, watching, measuring, and every time she looked at him she felt that stone in her chest get just a little heavier. Because underneath all the focus and all the training and all the clinical thinking that was keeping her moving forward, there was a woman who was absolutely terrified of losing her husband. A woman who remembered every moment they had shared, every sacrifice they had made for each other, every time they had found their way back to one another against odds that should have made it impossible. She was not going to let this be the end of that story. She refused, but refusing was not enough on its own. She needed something more, and that was when the real weight of what lay ahead of her began to settle in. Because Claire was starting to realize that the herbs and the paste and everything she had prepared might not be enough by themselves. She was going to have to make a choice that no one else in that room even knew was coming. A choice that was going to sit with her for the rest of her life, no matter how things turned out. She set down the clock she was holding, closed her eyes for just 1 second, and then opened them again. There was no more time for hesitation. Jamie needed her to move, and Claire Fraser had never once in her life stopped moving when someone she loved needed her to keep going. Most people think that saving someone's life is a single moment, a dramatic rush of action, a sudden breakthrough, and then relief. But the truth is nothing like that. The truth is that saving someone's life is a long, grinding, exhausting battle that happens inch by inch, minute by minute, with no guarantee that any of it is going to work. It is making one decision and then immediately making another. It is holding yourself together on the outside while everything on the inside is screaming. It is looking at the person you love more than anything in this world and choosing, over and over again, to fight for them even when the situation is telling you to stop. That was exactly what Claire was living through right now, and she was just getting started. She had made her initial assessment. She had applied the first treatment. But Jamie's body was not responding the way she needed it to. His fever was still climbing. She could feel it every time she touched him. That terrible burning heat underneath his skin that told her his body was working itself to exhaustion trying to fight something it could not beat alone. He needed to bring that fever down, and she needed to do it carefully, because pushing too hard in the wrong direction could cause just as much damage as the infection itself. This was the part that no one outside of medicine ever fully understood. Healing was not just about attacking the problem. It was about managing everything around the problem at the same time without letting any one thing spiral out of control. She moved quickly to the pot of water she had set aside and began preparing a compress. The water had cooled to the right temperature. Not cold enough to shock his system, but cool enough to start pulling some of that heat away from the surface of his skin. She folded a clean cloth, soaked it through, and pressed it gently against his forehead. Then she prepared another and laid it along the side of his neck where the pulse was running so fast and so shallow it made her stomach tighten every time she felt it. She worked in silence, replacing the compresses every few minutes, watching his face for any sign of change. There was a moment, somewhere in the middle of all of this, where Jamie's eyes opened just slightly. Not fully, just enough that she could see a thin strip of blue beneath his lashes. He did not speak. He probably did not have the strength to, but his eyes found her face almost immediately. Like even in the state he was in, some part of him always knew exactly where she was. She stopped what she was doing for just a second, just 1 second. She leaned close to him and spoke quietly, so quietly that no one else in the room could hear what she said. She told him she was there. She told him she was not going anywhere. She told him that he needed to hold on because she was not finished yet and she needed him to still be with her when she was done. His eyes closed again, but something in his face had shifted, just barely, just enough that she could see it. A faint easing of the tension around his mouth, like some part of him had heard her and decided to listen. She straightened up, pressed her lips together, and went back to work. The next phase of what she was doing required every bit of concentration she had. She had been mentally preparing a more aggressive treatment since she first assessed the wound. Something she had held back initially because it carried risks that she needed to think through carefully. But time was no longer on her side and careful thinking had to give way to decisive action. She went to the bundle of dried herbs she had hanging on the wall and selected two specific ones with the practiced certainty of someone who had dyed plant medicine long enough to trust her own hands. She brought them to the table, crushed them together in the clay bowl, added a small amount of the warm water, and worked the mixture into something closer to a liquid than the thick paste she had used before. This preparation was meant to go into his body rather than onto the wound. It was a calculated risk. The compounds in these plants, when taken internally, had properties that she believed could help his blood fight what the external treatment alone was not reaching. She had seen evidence of this kind of approach working in her reading of historical remedies, and she had her own knowledge of pharmacology from her time in the 20th century layered on top of that. She was essentially building a bridge between two worlds of medicine and betting Jamie's life on the strength of that bridge. She sat beside him, lifted his head gently, and coaxed the liquid into him slowly, a small amount at a time, making sure he could swallow without choking. It took patience. It took steadiness. It took a kind of calm that she had to manufacture entirely from the inside because she did not actually feel calm at all. She felt like someone standing at the edge of something very high with the wind pushing against her, just holding her position through sheer will alone. When she finished, she set him back down carefully and sat for a moment with her hand resting on his chest, feeling it rise and fall. Still too fast, still too shallow, but rising and falling. He was still here. She was still in this fight. And then came the part she had been dreading. The part that had been sitting at the back of her mind since she first realized what this situation was going to demand of her, the moral weight of it had been growing heavier with every hour that passed. And now it had reached the point where she could no longer push it aside or save it for later. There was someone else in that house who needed medicine. Someone else who was relying on what little supplies Claire had left. Someone innocent. Someone who had done nothing wrong and who deserved care just as much as Jamie did. But Claire did not have enough for both of them. Not anymore. The choice she had been circling around since the beginning of this nightmare had finally arrived, and it was standing right in front of her, solid and unavoidable. She could feel it in the room the way you feel a change in the weather before. It actually arrives, heavy and certain and already decided by forces larger than any single person. She looked at Jamie. She looked at the doorway that led to the other room. She looked at her hands, and then she made the only decision she could live with, even though she already knew it was going to cost her more than she could measure right now. She stood up, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the table to prepare what she needed next. No hesitation, no looking back, because Claire Fraser had learned a long time ago that the hardest choices are not the ones that take the longest to make. They are the ones you know the answer to immediately and spend the rest of your life carrying. Asterisk, there is a silence that comes after a storm that feels completely different from the silence that existed before it. It carries something in it, a weight, a memory of everything that just happened. The air feels different inside it. The light looks different through it. Everything is the same as it was, and yet nothing is the same at all. That was the silence that had settled over the room. Now the fire was still burning. The walls were still standing. But something had shifted permanently, the way the ground shifts after an earthquake, quietly and completely. And you only fully understand it when you try to take a step and realize the floor beneath you is no longer exactly where it used to be. Jamie's fever broke just before dawn. Claire felt it happen before she saw it. The burning heat underneath his skin began to soften, slowly at first, like ice at the very beginning of a thaw. She had been sitting beside him for hours, not sleeping, not moving far from his side, just watching and waiting and replacing the compresses and checking his pulse every few minutes with a regularity that had become its own kind of prayer. And then, at some point in that quiet gray space between the darkest part of the night and the very first suggestion of morning light, she pressed her hand to his forehead and felt something different, something cooler, something that made her close her eyes and exhale for what felt like the first time in days. She checked his pulse again. It was slower now, steadier. Still not where she wanted it, but moving in the right direction with a consistency that told her the treatment was working. His breathing had evened out to no longer that shallow flickering rhythm that had frightened her so deeply, but something longer and more settled. Something that sounded like a body beginning to rest instead of a body beginning to give up. She sat very still for a long moment, just listening to it, her hand still resting lightly on his chest, feeling every rise and every fall like it was the most important thing she had ever felt in her life. When Jamie finally opened his eyes properly, fully, and looked at her with recognition and awareness behind his gaze, Claire did not cry. She had expected to. She had thought that when this moment came, if it came, she would fall apart in some way, that all the emotion she had been holding back for hours and hours would finally find its way out. But instead she just looked at him, and he looked at her, and everything that needed to be said between them lived in that look in a way that no words could have carried more honestly. He tried to speak. His voice came out rough and quiet, barely more than a sound at first, but she heard it. She always heard him. He said her name, just her name, and she leaned forward, took his hand in both of hers, and told him to be still. She told him he had been very sick. She told him he was going to be all right now. She told him she had him, and something in his face, already beginning to look more like himself again, settled into a kind of peace that made her chest ache with a feeling too large and too complicated to name simply. But peace, As Claire had learned many times over in her extraordinary and painful life, never arrives alone. It always brings something with it, a bill that needs to be paid, a consequence waiting quietly in the next room, and this time was no different. The choice she had made in the deepest and darkest part of the night, the one she had walked toward, with her eyes open and her heart already breaking, had consequences that were now fully real and fully present. The person she had been unable to give her remaining medicine to had not died, but they had suffered more than they should have. More than they would have if Claire had been able to split herself into and be everywhere at once. The guilt of that was already settling into her bones with the particular permanence of something she knew she was going to carry for a very long time. She did not try to explain it away or wrap it in justification. Claire was too honest for that. She understood what she had done and she understood why she had done it, and she also understood that understanding a decision does not make the weight of it any lighter. She had chosen Jamie. She had chosen the person who was furthest from safety, the one closest to the edge, because that was the only logic available to her in that moment. But logic and peace are not the same thing, and she was not going to pretend otherwise when Jamie was strong enough to listen, and it took another full day before he truly was. She told him, not everything, not all at once, but enough. She sat beside him in the quiet of the late afternoon when the light was coming through the window at a low golden angle and everyone else had given them SP. And she told him what had happened and what she had done and what it had cost. She did not dramatize it. She did not seek comfort from him before he was ready to give it. She just told him the truth the way she always did, plainly and completely. Because that was the foundation their entire life together had been built on. Jamie listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and took her hand, the same way she had taken his when he first woke up, and he held it. He told her that she had saved his life. She told him she knew that. He told her that he understood what it had cost her and that he was not going to pretend it had not happened or that it did not matter. And then he said something that stayed with her. He said that the fact that it cost her something, the fact that she was sitting here carrying the weight of it instead of pushing it away, was exactly what made her who she was. And who she was, he told her quietly, was the only person in any century who could have brought him back from where he had been. She did not have a response to that. She did not need one. She just held his hand and sat with him in that golden afternoon light and let the silence between them be what it was. Not empty, not heavy, just full. Full of everything they had been through together, everything they had survived, everything they had lost and found and lost again and somehow, impossibly, found once more. Outside the window the world was continuing, the way it always does, completely indifferent to the enormous private battles being fought inside the walls of ordinary rooms. But inside that room, something had been decided that went beyond medicine and beyond the crisis that had just passed. Something about the nature of love itself had been demonstrated in the most quiet and devastating and honest way possible. That love is not a feeling you fall into. It is a choice you make when every other option would have been easier. It is a decision you walk toward with your eyes open, knowing the cost, and choosing anyway. Claire Fraser had always known that. She had known it from the first moment she understood what Jamie meant to her. But now she had lived it in a way that would never leave her. And Jamie, lying there watching her face in the fading light, knew it too. He had always known it about her. But now he had proof written into the very fact that he was still breathing, still here, still holding her hand in the quiet of a room that had almost become something else entirely. Season 8 is building towards something. Every choice made in this episode, every sacrifice, every consequence, every quiet moment between two people who have fought harder than anyone to stay together, is adding to a final chapter that is going to hit differently because of everything that came before it. This was not just an episode about Claire saving Jamie. This was an episode about what love actually looks like when it is tested all the way down to its foundation. And what it looks like, it turns out, is exactly this: imperfect and painful and absolutely unbreakable.